Thank you very much, Jordan. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to present today a story about how Chinese megacities manages their automobiles. The title, I call it Subtleties in Bold Design, to mean that the challenges in managing cars is severe, but the policy interventions is dramatic in Chinese cities. But today's presentation, I want to focus on there are increasing subtleties in this bold design. The bold part, I will take 2 minutes. It's easy to convince you guys the intervention is indeed at a grand scale. But the subtlety takes more time to appreciate. So let me start with 2 pictures. Everybody will be familiar with this picture of Beijing, but less of you will be able to recognize this. This is Beijing in 1980s. So within 30 years, Beijing as a city transformed itself from largely sustainable transportation mode system to a mostly motorized-based system. And if you look at now, what you see is cars. And if you in the 80s, all you see are the buses and the bicycles. Yeah. There are different stories you can tell with these 2 pictures. For example, you can tell a story about bicycles. Bicycle mode share was 60% in 1980s, and it dropped down to 16% recently. There are 40 percentage point reduction of bicycle mode share. Yeah. If anything we want to claim about sustainable transportation, this is really contrast to even ridiculous any claim of we are constructing or developing a sustainable transportation system. I attended a bicycle conference in Vancouver called Velo City, and I tried to make the point that there are thousands of people in the rest of the world try to promote bicycle, but all those efforts combined is dwarfed by the decline in China alone. So that's the scale we're talking about. That's one story. You can also tell a story about public transit development. This is not subway system in Beijing 2000, this 2011, and this 2015. Yeah. If you talk about the policy intervention in terms of the infrastructure construction, you couldn't be bolder than this. Yeah. This effort is really laudable about the public transit development. But today's topic, I want to drive our attention to the automobile growth. So here, if you look at Beijing's situation, it took Beijing about half a century to add the first million cars. But the last million took Beijing 1 year to add 1 million vehicles to the city. Yeah. That's exorbitant scale of growth here. And if you look at the world market, China is by far the biggest car market in the world now. 18 million vehicles per year versus 12 million in the US. And this contributes a lot to the 2 billion car story that Professor Spurling often talk about in the 2030. But my point, today's discussion is trying to argue that this overall grand growth in China conceals significant variations among the city. It's the variation that I want to really talk about today. Let's take Beijing and Shanghai as an example. Both cities are very rich, very developed, very dense. They're rather comparable, but their transportation policy could not be more different from each other. If you look at the car ownership in 2004, both cities own about 2 million vehicles. But 7 years later, Beijing has 5 million vehicles and Shanghai has 3.5 million vehicles. There's a 1.5 million gap happened during that 7 years. I'm not saying Shanghai is not congested, but Beijing is much, much worse here. And also, if you look at the household, if you look at the growth rate, Shanghai is about 7% per year growth, and Beijing is a 17% compound growth rate. Also, if you look at the household ownership figure, Beijing has Shanghai has 18% household owned car, and Beijing doubles that again. So there are huge differences between the 2 cities, and many factors contribute to that. But I argue that one of the main factors is the active policy intervention from China, from Shanghai municipal government. So I'm here to present 2 cases quickly. One is about the particular policy in Shanghai called car license auction policy, and also then talk a little bit on Beijing's lottery. I try to argue that the lottery auction oriented towards the social equity, but what it achieves is a superficial level of this equity orientation. So start with the first one. Shanghai borrowed the idea from Singapore. It's a simple idea. If you want to drive, so the government first of all set up the quota of each month, the car allowed on the street. And whoever wants to buy a car comes and bid for it, and whoever pays higher gets a license. It's a very simple idea. But Shanghai implemented at a grand scale. Let me give you 3 time series. So the bottom one is the number of quota allowed issued each month, and the red line are the number of bidders, and the blue line are the settling bidding price. There's a lot to be said about the interaction between the three lines, but for now, let's focus on the level of the price. It recently settles around 70 to 80,000 yuan. That's about 10,000 US dollars. What it means is, if you want to register a car, you need to pay the government $10,000. Yeah. I mean, Chinese here, we kind of get used to that. In any Western country, this policy will be deemed as draconian. Charge people $10,000 to just buy a car, except Singapore. That's only another exception. But if you look at the number here, 70,000 yuan per vehicle times 10,000 vehicles per year, per month, times 12 months, that's a lot of money. So if you look at this from the public finance point of view, this policy accumulated around 6 billion Chinese yuan along from this policy. Here, give you a sense of the scale. What does this 6 billion mean? In 2010, the revenue collected from Shanghai is 4 billion yuan. And on the same year, the aggregate, the total public subsidy to the transit system in Shanghai is 2.5 billion yuan. Shanghai is one of the biggest transit systems. And many cities in the world are struggling with how to finance your public transit system. And Shanghai's policy, this license policy alone, more than offset the total subsidy to the public transit. I mean, this phenomenon actually says as much as about how big the revenue is, also as about how little the subsidy is, but that's another story here. So if you look at the policy here, from the demand management point of view, it dampened the growth rate by half relative to Beijing. From a public finance point of view, it provided a large, stable, and a growing source of revenue. So how great it is. Any transportation professional are envying the fact that Shanghai can do that. But is this a great policy? So what's missing from this story? This all looks beautiful here. But what's missing is, do people accept it? That's the political part, the public opinion that stops most of the Western cities from doing that. So how come China can do that? What's going on there? Indeed, this is the license. The Hu A is the Shanghai A license. It's deemed as the most expensive piece of art in China, not in the world, again because Singapore is actually more expensive here. But so we will look like, we want to investigate to what extent people accept this policy. And we try to argue that the three core policy drivers. One is the perceived effectiveness, the second one is affordability, and then the equity. And we developed the whole framework of this public acceptance. And one thing I want to pay attention is in the equity here, in the Chinese context, there's more complexity about the equity. There's a rich and poor within the auction. There's also a government vehicle issue. There's a comparison with other cities. There's a transparent issue. So there's an additional peculiar equity dimension that's unique to Chinese cities. So with all that, we implement a primary data collection in Shanghai in different phases. I will pass on, but let me show you the result. Before we ask people the core question, we ask two preconditions. One is to what degree you agree with that there's high congestion level in Shanghai. Not surprisingly, majority of people strongly agree or agree. But the second question is interesting. It's asking about to what extent you agree the government should intervene in this case. Yeah, but what do we find also? Majority of people agree that it's government's responsibility to do something about it. Both questions are important preconditions to implement any intervention in the transportation demand. So this is the main question we ask about: do you accept the policy? And to get a reliable measure, we use this psychometric measurement, different indicator, etc. But let me show you the result. The result is shown as a distribution. To the right is if you fully accept the policy. To the left is you fully unaccept the policy. What do we find is this? Sorry, it didn't work. Let me show you. Broadly speaking, distribution looks like this. Kind of a normal curve distribution. That's about 43% negative, 30-something positive, and 20-something neutral. Overall, it's moderately negative. But my point is not that it's negative. The point is the result is not that negative. Again, if you think about, if you imagine the policy in Boston, Vancouver, any place, the distribution will look like this. Very much concentrated to the left. Yeah, so Shanghai managed to implement a very harsh policy without a very significant public resistance to that. Yeah, there's moderate ones, but not significant ones. But then if you look at each of the drivers, in terms of effectiveness, people are actually positive about it. Agree that it moderately worked. In terms of affordability, people have concerns. So the downside, the negative side means they have issues. But what really kind of pisses people off is the equity dimension. The private vehicle auction, the government vehicle, the comparison of other cities, and particularly the transparency of revenue usage of the government vehicle that has the lowest public opinion in that. So with that, I think these are the factors we identify how Shanghai government could continue to improve the policy. Overall, I'm really positive about the policy, but the areas that you could continue to improve. Just say a little bit word about Beijing briefly. Beijing, for a long time, didn't intervene in transportation, in automobile, until the beginning of Olympic Games. And Shanghai, in contrast, started in 1994. So the biggest mistake Beijing made is they didn't do that until very late, 2008. By that time, many people agree that argues that it's already too late. Yeah. But my point is, in 2011, Beijing also chose to control the ownership quota, but try to allocate in a very different mechanism. Shanghai choose to allocate by auction, but Beijing choose to do it by lottery. If you think about it, they have a different orientation here. Shanghai tried to embrace the market mechanism. It's efficiency-oriented, but Beijing tried to embrace the equity dimension into that. But most people, hopefully you know that, give every people equal probability of winning. But give you the final conclusion I have about Beijing's policy. In terms of the effectiveness, if you translate this growth curve into the percentage growth, is around 15% a year until 2010. 2011, January, they had the lottery policy. And right after, this issue there, the growth rate went down to 3 or 5%. So in terms of effectiveness, this policy is extraordinary. It brings down the growth rate from 15, 20% to 3 and 5. Yeah, and it's immediate. And for most policy evaluation, the difficulty is to the causality, because when policy happens, something else happens. How do you disentangle? But in this case, you don't even need to prove the causality. The policy set it to be 3%, therefore it's 3%. Thank you, yeah. And then in terms of the efficiency, let me give you the conclusion. I argue that's the worst way of allocating resources in using lottery, but I don't have time to elaborate on that. But even in terms of fairness, my argument is there's a huge dimension of equity that we need to consider, but this policy only addresses a small portion of this broader equity demand. Therefore, I conclude as this policy's equity concern addressing is superficial. That's the two stories I want to mention. Just give you the last point about as a conclusion about the general transportation policy making patterns I observe in China. The first one is there's an increasing cocktails, a different combination of state market combination. There's a tougher trade-off the city has to make. There's the evolution of the decision-making in transportation down to the municipal level. There's strong policy learning, transfer, and mobility across the board in the country. So China has been piloting, evaluate, codify, disseminate, and try to scale up. That's a very good model. That's why China is called the laboratory of public policies. All right, we'll stop here given the time. Thank you, guys.
谢谢，这个非常有意思的报告。